What's going on, YouTube family? Tio here with Simplistic Fishing. Today, I'm going to do things a little bit different. I know we've been doing a lot of lake breakdowns, Google waypoints, all that good stuff. I know you guys like that, but I also want to talk to you about really fine tuning that, like getting into those spots and understanding what we call patterns. So today, I want to break down our top 3 patterns that are working for us right now here in North Texas. Let's jump into this thing. All right, so let's talk about the top 3 spring patterns. Now, these are the 3 patterns that I would say have been working the best for us over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So these have worked on both Lake Hubbard, Lake Tawakoni, and I've also been doing some free fishing for the regional tournaments down there in Lake of the Pines too, and some of these patterns are working down there as well. So I know this works for you, and I know that you can go out and have some success with it. So let's talk about it first as far as what I mean by patterns. So I know this is going to be some basic information for some of you. You maybe can just skip ahead. But really when I'm talking about patterns, I'm talking about paying attention where you're fishing. So let's say that you decide to fish 3 bank lines. And on each of those bank lines, you actually pay attention where you're catching fish at or where you're getting bites. And then maybe what you realize after fishing those 3 bank lines is that all of your bites came at the midsection of that pocket or that cove that you were fishing. So then from that point, from that point forward for the rest of the day, all you need to do is just focus on the midsection of pockets and coves that are similar to that and run that pattern throughout the lake and you will have success. It really is that easy, but it's not as easy as just it's the midsection and you're good. You have to pay attention to other things like, did you catch it on a dock? Did you catch it on rocks? Did you catch it on a laydown? Was the wind blowing from the north, the south, the east, to the west? Is it cloudy? Is it sunny? All that good stuff. All those things kind of go in and make a variable for it. But as you know, this is simplistic fishing. So I'm going to break it down as simplistic as I can for you. And hopefully you guys will find some success from this. So our number 1 pattern that I just absolutely love, to me, it is probably my favorite way to fish, and that is flipping the buckbrush. And what I mean by buckbrush, you can see here on the screen, this is what it looks like. Sometimes you'll see it a lot thicker. Sometimes you'll actually see 2 layers. There'll be a layer in the back and then a layer that's a little bit flooded. The nice thing about buckbrush is it's always in that shallow, little flooded water. And in the springtime, the water is typically up. So usually you'll see this on the bank lines of the shores here in the lakes that we have in Texas. These are golden spots to find fish, and it is tons of fun to catch them. So let's dive in and talk to you a little bit about what we do when we see this buckbrush, what we're looking for, the areas we look for it in, and what the baits and the techniques is that we use to catch this. So I talked to you guys a little bit about this when I talked about the last tournament that we had at Lake Tawakoni, where Landon basically used this method of flipping brush to end up placing 4th in the tournament out of 176 boats and securing Angler of the Year. So this is a great pattern to learn. And if you live here in North Texas, I would strongly suggest giving this a whirl. So first off, let's jump into it. The baits that I would use for this, whenever we're flipping, I know we can do flipping jigs and things like that. Really, I want to say these are just the patterns that we're using and the techniques that we're using for those patterns. So we love to use the Strike King Rage Bugs. You guys saw that. I put that in the last video as well. That's probably my number 1. My number 2 is going to be the Reaction Innovations Beaver. I love the beaver style baits. They're probably my 2nd favorite. Were probably my number 1 favorite until I ran across the Rage Bug. And then the last one would be the Zoom Lizard. Lizards are always good this time of year. When we're talking about colors for all these baits, we're talking black and blue, green pumpkin, maybe with some red fleck in it if you can find it, watermelon red, or June bug red. So focus on those colors. Don't get too sidetracked with all the different color options that are out there in the market. Just focus on those, and that will really help you. And then in regards to the weights, I prefer to peg the weights. Myself, I typically don't really care if it's tungsten or not, but I'm starting to kind of fall in love with tungsten, especially since Academy came out with that H2O brand. You can buy those tungsten weights for a lot cheaper now. So if you can afford it, I would buy the tungsten, but if not, you're not necessarily going to be losing fish by any means because you don't use tungsten weights. The tungstens are just a little slimmer, so they profile from the bait better, and then they have more sensitivity as well. So if you can afford it, get some tungstens, but if you're new to fishing, I'd probably stay away from that because you're going to get hung up a lot. And every time you get hung up, you don't want to be losing $1 a weight just because you're losing those tungsten weights. But as you get more experience, definitely start to switch over to the tungsten. Again, I do peg that. I don't think Landon pegs his. I do peg mine, so it's really more of a preference thing. We both use 20-pound fluorocarbon. And as far as the hooks go, I like just the regular EWG hook. I don't have a problem using that or having problems getting hung up and things like that. But a lot of people will say, you're going to get hung up more doing that with your hook being more exposed. I'm starting to switch over to the flipping hook. I kind of like it a little bit better. I can totally hide the part of the hook, that comes out, usually gets hung up. So I've been pretty happy with the flipping hooks. But I gotta say, this weekend I fished one day with the just the standard hooks with the EWG hooks, and then one day with the flipping hooks. My hookup ratio was actually better with the standard hooks than it was with the flipping hooks. I lost 2 fish on the flipping hooks, and I was really disappointed in that. So not saying that it was the hook's fault. It was probably the operator's fault, which would be me, poor hook set or something like that. But anyways, that's my experience. But I also have been flipping with those EWG hooks for a long time and never really had any problems. So it's kind of hard to convince them of new tricks. When it comes to keys to this buck brush, I think this is the most important key that's out there. And I see a lot of people go down the bank line and fish this totally wrong. And then they probably wonder, why in the world does that guy on Simplistic Fishing say that this is a good pattern? Because it is a good pattern, but it's only a good pattern if you fish it right. So what I mean by that is that you have to make sure that you're flipping your bait completely into the center of the bush. If you're just setting back with the boat 15, 20 feet off the shore, maybe even farther than that, and you're casting into the edges of it with the spinner bait, the odds of you catching a fish are not very likely at all. In fact, you're probably going to struggle tremendously trying to even get a bite. But if you change it and you take your boat and you move your boat up to where you're only 5 or 10 feet away from those brush, where your trolling motor is actually starting to bump into the ground because you're so shallow, then you're putting yourself in an opportunity to catch some fish, because now you're going to be able to flip into the center of those bushes where those fish are actually hiding and where they ambush that bait. And sometimes you'll even hit them on the top of the head. I mean, it is that important that you flip that into the center of the bush. If you're just going down there and flipping the outside of the bushes, you might as well just go out to a point and throw your Texas rig and drag it around, because you're going to have better luck out there than you are flipping around this buck brush. So I can't stress enough how important it is that if you're going to flip, you learn how to flip, and you learn how to flip directly into the center of those bushes and right on the sides of the roots. If you don't flip in those areas, and I'm talking it's a tight little area, you will not get any bites. So I want to make sure that I really stress that on this video, and I want to make sure that when you're out there fishing, that you are really paying attention to how close you're putting that bait to that bush. You basically want it in the bush, on the bush, or touching the bush. All right, so I think I'm off my soapbox on that. I think I've stressed that enough. I think that was probably the biggest change in my fishing for flipping, was when I truly learned that how important that was. That was when I started catching bigger fish, better fish, and a lot more fish. As far as the locations for buckbrush, this time of year, being the spring here, it's March 29th today. Our water conditions are just a little bit above 60 degrees in most of our lakes. So I'm really looking at secondary points and then anything back from those secondary points. So I try to find the buckbrush that's on the secondary points, and then I will literally work it back as far as I can, depending on where I'm getting my bites, and then we'll change up the day based on that. So let's switch over and let's talk about the number 2 pattern that we really like, and that is shallow flats. You'll see here in the picture, this is a flat from Lake Fork, one of the most common community flats that are out there. The thing that I really like about flats, and the things that we really like to focus on, really are, and we'll talk about here in a minute, but really hydrilla. If I can find hydrilla in a shallow flat, that's money. If I can't find that, I'm at least looking for a creek channel that's in that flat. When it comes to baits that we would throw when we go into these types of flats, the first one would be frogs. Definitely in the morning or late in the evening, you want to throw frogs when you're back in here, especially when you're in that grass. There's no better place to throw a frog, and there's no more fun to have than throwing a frog and not throw. As far as other baits to throw, you can throw swim baits, you can throw chatter baits, and lipless crankbaits. Those all work really well for us. The frogs, I tend to have better luck with the frogs when it's a black frog with like that little yellow fleck on it, on the top of it, and maybe a little red on the bottom, or just a plain old white frog. So it almost looks like a minnow just kind of flopping along the surface of the water. When it comes to rattle traps, typically we're going to throw, the red and the orange that we talked about in the pre-spawn video as well, but you're really looking at for red rattle traps or something with some bright orange on it. And then I really, really love throwing a jackhammer in the grass. Love doing that. The jackhammer to me is key because you really get that chatter right off the bat. And as far as colors go, I would prefer red this time of year or white. Really any other color don't mess with. Sometimes you might mess with that bluegill color. That can be pretty good as well. But red and white for right now, this time of season. And then as far as the swim bait goes, you're really just looking for more pearl white, just something that looks more like a minnow. And some other things to think about as far as the line goes, when we're throwing the frogs, we always throw the frogs on a 65-pound braid. And then everything else we talked about as far as the chatterbait, the swim bait, and the rattle trap, you should be good just to throw a 20-pound fluorocarbon on those. Just some keys to think about when you're looking at these shallow flats. First thing would be locating the bends of the creek channels. So if you go into the flat, you really want to pay attention to where the creek channel is. And wherever that creek channel is, where it makes a bend, it's usually going to flatten out on the side of where that bend is on one of those sides. Those are usually primary areas to fish, either in that channel or right up there on the flats of where those bends are. So focus in on where those bends are and pay more attention when you're fishing those spots to those areas. And really slow down and fish them and make sure that you really covered that entire area, because that's probably where your fish are going to be. And then really the other thing is really just paying attention to those weed lines and the grass lines. Typically those will be along the creek channel or very close to the creek channel. So just pay attention to where those grass lines are. If you have live scope, it's great because you can really tell. But if you don't have live scope, just get you some polarized sunglasses and visually find out where that weed line is and work right along that weed line, and you'll be surprised at what you can catch there as well. So really that covers the shallow flats. Let's talk about the number 3 pattern now, get it into the last one, and you might be a little surprised, but it's bridges. Bridges of all things are actually great areas to find fish, especially during this time of season. So we're talking pre-spawn, post-spawn, and spawn. It's all kind of happening together. And if you think about it, when you're looking at bridges, if you can find bridges that are going in or kind of going over different creek channels, especially creek channels that are going into flats, those bridges are perfect stopping spots for those fish to stop, feed up, catch shad, hide behind the pillars, hide behind the edges of the bank lines of the two edges of it, and really you get a lot of current from the wind and everything else. So, and you typically have some pretty decent depth there. So when you talk about bridges, those are great areas to find bass. I know a lot of people think that's just like a great crappie spot or maybe catch some catfish, but there are largemouth bass stacked on pretty much all the bridges all over the place. So never ever discount the bridge. So let's jump into it and let's talk a little bit more about bridges and how we work these bridges. So the first thing goes, in regards to the baits. So the baits we use would be A-rigs, jerk baits, and shaky heads. When it comes to colors for the A-rig, typically you're just looking at pearl white for your swim baits. You may change up some colors here and there, but really you're looking more for white type of swim baits. The jerk baits, you're also going to be throwing white. If it can have a little bit of like an orange belly on it or some little bit of flash on it, that always helps. And then also you want to usually go with a little bit deeper diving jerk bait, especially if you're fishing around those pillars. So maybe you're throwing the 110s by Megabass, get a 110 plus 1 and a 110 plus 2 and just kind of figure out your depth. And then the last thing with the would be the shaky heads. I love throwing the watermelon with the red flake and then Junebug red this time of year. Those are probably my 2 favorite colors. In regards to line, on the A-rig, I'm probably gonna have a lot of people argue with me on this, but this has just been our experience with the A-rig, it works well for us. We don't have any problems with it. And the thing that I like about it the most is I don't lose A-rigs anymore. So we started just tying the A-rig on with 65-pound braid, no leader line or anything. Doesn't give us any problems. We still catch great fish with it. And anytime we get hung up with that A-rig, we know that we can yank on it and bend out the hook and not lose our entire rig. So for me, it's braid all the way with A-rigs. I don't have any issues with it, and probably won't be able to change my mind on that one anymore. As far as the jerk baits go, it's funny. This actually says 121, or actually it looks like 121, but it's 12-pound fluorocarbon for the jerk baits. Sometimes we'll go 12 pounds, sometimes we'll go 10 pound, and then on the shaky head, usually it's 15 pound. For the shaky head, Landon actually throws it on 20 pound. I like it on a little bit lighter line. I like the feel of the lighter line a little bit better, especially when I'm working the shaky head slowly around the pillars or around the edges of those causeways where the bridges are. Some of the keys here would be really focus on the edges. So look at all four corners. Make sure that you focus on all four corners, because they love to set up on the corners, or really the pillars that are kind of, I would say, 1 or 2 in from the edges. So focus on the pillars that are 1 or 2 in from the edges, and focus in on the edges. And that's typically where your fish will be. But the other thing you got to pay attention to as well is, where does that creek channel come through? Does it come through on the dead center of the bridge, or is it actually further to the right or further to the left? Because wherever that creek channel is, you need to fish around there as well. It might still be in, 25, 30 foot of water, but some of those fish are just hanging out in like 10 foot of water, just waiting to ambush shad. So it's not that you're fishing really that deep. Yes, you're in deep water, but you're still just throwing your jerkbait out and jerking it around, in 8 to 12 feet of water. No difference than if you were sitting in 15 foot of water and doing the same thing. So don't be scared to get out there a little bit further and get around that creek channel and see what kind of fish are out there, because there's some good quality fish to be caught out there. A lot of people just don't pay too much attention to it. And with Texas, a lot of our bridges are no wake only. So it's great because you can just set under the bridge. You don't have to worry about load traffic or anything like that. So anyways, don't be scared of the bridges. They can really, really take care of you. And then as far as the locations of these bridges, the main thing that I want to talk to you about there is what we talked about earlier, and that's bridges near or leading to the backs of creeks. So when we looked at that one on Fork, there was a bridge right before it got back to the back of the flat. If you look at Cedar Creek, if you go out to Cedar Creek, there's lots of bridges that cover over. And then if you go north or south, depending on where it's at, it takes you right into a creek. So those are the bridges that you want, where those major creek arms are coming underneath the bridge, or major creek channels coming under the bridge. Those are the bridges that you want to focus on. And if you do that, you'll be surprised. Some of the bigger fish that we've caught have came off the bridges, not doing some of the other stuff, that you would typically see most people fishing. So that really wraps us up for the conversation for today, guys. I really, really hope this helps you. Hopefully, it'll at least simplify some things for you. I know when you go out there on the lake, for example, I went out on Lake of the Pines this Saturday for the first time, and it's a little overwhelming when you hit that water and you start looking around and you realize that everything looks fishable, but that it's not all fishable, and that you're going to waste a lot of time. So really just take some of these things, learn from this, take these 3 things and just focus on these 3 patterns next time you go out. For the next 3 or 4 weeks, this pattern is going to work really, really good. So focus on these 3 patterns for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Really try to hone in on them and, fine tune your craft. And trust me, guys, you're going to start catching more fish for sure, because you're fishing the right patterns at the right time of the year. So anyways, I hope this helps you guys. Tight lines to all of you. Hope you get your PB. And if you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, please do so. We've got a lot of good information coming for you, and we always appreciate your support. Until next time, take care, guys.